Hello and welcome to Train Signal. You're watching vSphere Replication, Introduction and Installation. In this lesson, we'll be talking about an all-new feature of vSphere 5.1 called vSphere Replication. I'll start off with a short introduction explaining to you what it is and how it can help you before I walk you through the installation process. So with that, let's get started. New in VMware vSphere 5.1 is the new vSphere Replication feature. vSphere Replication provides virtual machine level replication. That means an individual virtual machine is selected to be replicated from one vSphere host or ESXi host to another ESXi host. That's what vSphere Replication does. It replicates individual virtual machines from host to host. This is not the same as VMware's Site Recovery Manager. Site Recovery Manager is a much more comprehensive disaster recovery planning and failover solution, which can take advantage of other replication solutions such as vSphere Replication or replication found in your storage area network. Now, vSphere Replication is included with all editions of VMware vSphere except for the Essentials edition, and it's also not included with the free vSphere hypervisor. In other words, vSphere Replication comes with vSphere Essentials Plus and above. Now, as far as why you should use vSphere Replication, let's cover some benefits. First off, this is a low-cost replication solution. That means that replication can finally be made available to small and medium-sized businesses that otherwise couldn't afford those expensive hardware-based replication solutions. Now, I should caution that by saying that vSphere Replication is a software-based solution, and it's also asynchronous replication, meaning that you'll likely have some data loss, unlike those expensive CDP or continuous data protection hardware-based SAN solutions. Still, I'm very thankful for vSphere Replication because this asynchronous software-based solution is a fantastic solution for the SMB and for most types of virtual machines that you'll find at just about any company. vSphere Replication is easy to set up and integrates with VMware vCenter. It can also integrate with VMware's Site Recovery Manager, which you could choose to use at a later date, even if you start using vSphere Replication now. vSphere Replication works with dissimilar servers and storage. So that means that, let's say, your primary data center, you have one brand of servers and a more expensive storage area network. At your disaster recovery data center or your secondary data center, you have some low-end servers and maybe some virtual storage or just some local storage. vSphere Replication can replicate your virtual machines from those dissimilar servers and storage arrays found at your primary and secondary data centers. And finally, vSphere Replication can automatically integrate with Microsoft's Volume Shadow services, meaning that when a virtual machine is replicated, the files and even the applications that support VSS will actually be quiesced or paused for the momentary second as the snapshot is taken and the blocks are identified that need to be replicated from site to site. Of course, the applications and files aren't paused while the replication occurs. That's because the replication is asynchronous. So the replicated data is queued up and the replication occurs over some period of time. And that's why perhaps if during that time you had a data center failure or a host failure or a storage array failure and you didn't have some other form of recovery, you could experience some data loss. But typically that type of data loss is recoverable for most companies. So again, to summarize, vSphere Replication is included with vSphere Essentials Plus and above. It's a great low-cost replication solution. It's an excellent solution for small and medium-sized businesses. It works with dissimilar servers and storage. And if you have vSphere Essentials Plus and above, and you have at least 2 sites, I don't see any reason that you shouldn't be considering or already implementing vSphere Replication. So how do you go about installing VMware vSphere Replication? Well, of course, first you need vSphere 5.1 or above. You'll have to have VMware vCenter and the vSphere web client. You'll also need, of course, 2 servers so that you can replicate from one server to another. Those are the most basic requirements for VMware vSphere Replication. Now let's go over to VMware's website and I'll show you exactly where to download the vSphere Replication virtual appliance, and then we'll get started deploying it into our vSphere virtual infrastructure. To get started with the vSphere 5.1 replication, you can download the vSphere replication virtual appliance from vMware.com. It is available in the 60-day evaluation of VMware vSphere 5.1 and also on the download page for the commercial edition of vSphere 5.1. If we scroll down, you'll find that the vSphere replication virtual appliance is available with every version of vSphere 5.1 except for the Essentials edition. In other words, starting with Essentials Plus and above, you'll see the vSphere replication virtual appliance available for download. If we scroll down, you can see the virtual appliance is available in two different formats, the OVA format at 486 megabytes or the ISO format at 723 megabytes. These are the exact same virtual appliance, again, just available in two different formats. I prefer the OVA format over the ISO format because with the ISO format, let's say that you have vCenter running as a virtual machine, you would attach that ISO to the vCenter virtual machine as a virtual CD DVD drive, then access the virtual appliance from there, and then perform the same deployment. To me, the OVA format just makes that deployment process easier. Now, in this case, I've already downloaded the OVA format of the vSphere replication virtual appliance, and I've placed it on a folder inside my vCenter server. So to get started with the deployment, let's go to the vSphere web client. Now, before we go about deploying our vSphere replication virtual appliances, let me first talk to you a little bit about the data centers that we'll be using to demonstrate this here at the Wired Brain Coffee Company. The Wired Brain Coffee Company, our fictitious scenario in this case, actually has two different data centers. They've got a primary data center and a secondary data center. So the primary site data center is at Hilton Head, South Carolina, and they actually have a vCenter server running on top of Windows to manage this virtual infrastructure. Now, in this virtual infrastructure, we're keeping it simple. We've just got a single ESXi host, and we've got just a single virtual machine. Now, their secondary site, or their secondary data center, is located in Dallas, Texas. This data center is actually managed by a different vCenter server, and it was deployed as the vCenter server appliance, the virtual appliance installation of VMware vCenter. So my point is, you've got two different deployment types of VMware vCenter here, one in Windows, one as the virtual appliance. This data center also has a single ESXi host and really just a single virtual machine. However, we do have a resource pool here running VMware vCenter operations. We won't go into that. That's for another lesson. The point of this lesson is to deploy the vCenter replication appliances. In fact, one in each of these two different sites so that we can perform replication across, let's say, a wide area network, or it could be a secure internet VPN tunnel. Now, I'll let you in on a little secret. These two different ESXi hosts are actually in the same data center using the same storage, and I happen to have two different virtual machines running vCenter. So really here I'm simulating, I'm actually faking having two different sites. But to learn about vSphere replication, you can do the same thing in your own lab. And if you have enough horsepower, you might even be able to do all of this in a virtual environment on the same physical server. I happen to have two different physical servers in this case, but even that is not required. So again, we have two different sites, two different data centers, two different vCenter servers, two different ESXi hosts, one at each data center, and we will be deploying two different vSphere replication virtual appliances, one at each of the two different sites. So let's first go back to the primary site. And as you know, we've already downloaded the vSphere replication virtual appliance. So to deploy that virtual appliance, I'm just going to right-click on the ESXi host up here and go down to Deploy OVF Template. That brings up the Deploy OVF Template wizard, and since we've already downloaded the virtual appliance, I'll use the local file option here. The URL option would be if the virtual appliance was out on the internet, we could put in a URL here to the OVF file and actually download the virtual appliance directly and then deploy it within the same wizard. We've reduced the number of steps because I wanted to ensure that we already have the vSphere replication appliance ready to go. So I'll choose the local file option here and click Browse. I'm just going to type in the path. It's actually on my vCenter server in the users folder, inside the administrator's user directory, and then inside desktop/v. So in here it says no items match your records. Well, let's go ahead and change this to all files, because actually we do have the vSphere replication virtual appliance right there. I'll just select that and say open. Now we have the full path in here to the OVA file. I'll click next. And it tells us you're about to deploy the vSphere replication appliance version 5.1.0.1 from VMware. The download size is 484 megabytes, but if thinly provisioned, it will take up 1.2 gigabytes of space, or if thickly provisioned, it will take up to 12 gigabytes of space. We're going to choose the thin option because, by golly, I don't want to use up 12 gigabytes of space on my storage area network here. I'll click next. We'll accept the end user license agreement and click next. We'll go ahead and put this inside the vCenter server, inside the Hilton Head Virtual Data Center, and click next. I want to deploy this out on my Drobo storage area network. It's got plenty of space. I'll choose the thin provisioning option because I don't want to take up 12 gigabytes of disk space if it's simply not needed. I'll click next here. We'll use the default virtual network here. We'll be using IP version 4 and click next. We need to enter the new root password here. There is no default password on the virtual appliance. It must be configured as part of this deployment process. Now here underneath network properties, this is where we can go in and statically configure the IP addresses of these virtual appliances we're about to deploy. So let's go ahead and do that. That'll just take a second. And with the static IP addressing defined here, I can click next. Now, before I do that, if we left this blank, which we could, DHCP would be used. So that's not really required, but it's obviously good to do in a production virtual infrastructure. Here it tells us that the vCenter extension service is a dependency, and it is required. In my experience, this was already installed by default. I didn't have to do anything to get this dependency up and running. Notice it says here the binding status, and there's a green check mark, so it appears that this has already been taken care of. I'll click next. We get a final review of what we're about to deploy here. I'll go ahead and check to power this virtual appliance on after deployment and click finish. Now if we go check our task on the right hand side, we can see we are deploying the OVF template. This will take just a few minutes, and in that time, let's go ahead and go over to the secondary site, the alternate backup data center, and go ahead and deploy the same virtual appliance over there. Here we are at the secondary site, the Dallas, Texas data center, and in this case, I'm just going to go through the same steps we just went through over at the primary site. So I'll go through these relatively fast because honestly, it's the exact same thing we just did. We're just repeating it. To deploy the OVF template again, I'll click allow here on the security exception. We'll enter the local file path to the OVA file that we just downloaded and deployed. I'll change this to OVA packages. There's the vSphere replication virtual appliance. I'll click open. We've got the path in there. I'll click next. Again, just take all the defaults here, really except for the password and the IP addressing. I'll put this in the Dallas, Texas virtual data center. Deploy it on the storage area network. In this case, I'll use thin provisioning. Take the default for networking. Change the password. Change the network properties. We'll click Next here. We have the dependency. We'll power it on after deployment and click Finish. Over on the right, we'll check our task. We can see we're deploying the OVF template. Should take just a minute. Let's go back to the primary site and check on the status of the vSphere replication appliance deployment there. All right, as you can see, we've got a vSphere replication appliance deployed here at the primary site, Hilton Head, South Carolina, for the Wired Brain Coffee Company. The virtual appliance is already powered on. We can see here the virtual machine tools are running. This is the vSphere replication appliance, and if we click on Launch Console, on the console we see this virtual machine has a menu-driven but text-based interface that VMware calls the VAMI, or the vSphere Appliance Management Interface. Now we could log into this, but I'll tell you simply all you can do here is configure the network settings. What they want you to do is to go to this URL up here. In this case, it's https://10.0.1.210, which is the static IP address we configured on the virtual appliance, and then :5480. So let's go ahead and do that now. I'll actually close out the virtual appliance console, open up a new browser window, go to the URL specified, accept the site's security certificate, and here we get the login for our vSphere replication appliance that we deployed at the primary site. So I'll just log in as root with the password that we configured and click login. And here is where you actually configure the vSphere replication virtual appliances. So there's a nice little graphic here. It tells us, you've got the protected site, you've got the recovery site. You can call these whatever you want: primary and secondary, primary and backup, data center A, data center B, whatever it is. You want to go into the configuration page here, which is just the next section, and then perform some basic configuration. So the vSphere replication host, in this case, is the IP address of the virtual appliance. You don't want to change that. You can, though, change the site name. So we could call this primary and then Hilton Head, South Carolina. The vCenter server address, which is already pre-configured here, that is correct for the primary site. And then you can see that the VRM service is running down here, so vSphere replication service is running. You could restart that if needed, but since we made a change up here, we need to click here to save and restart the service. It tells us the configuration was successfully saved. So let's go ahead and take a look at what else we can do in this vSphere replication appliance configuration. Here we can reconfigure the password. We can configure the SSL certificate. If we go into support, this is where you can generate a support bundle if you're having problems and the VMware support team needs you to submit a support bundle. This is where you would generate it. If we go into the network tab, this is where you can reconfigure the networking information for the vSphere replication appliance as well as the host name. If we go into update, this is where you can check for new updates or install updates to the vSphere replication appliance. And then underneath system, this is where you get information about the appliance version, where you can reboot the appliance, shut down the appliance, or even change the time zone. Let's go ahead and change the time zone for this vSphere replication appliance. Now, since this vSphere replication appliance is on the East Coast, we need to go to US Eastern, and I'll say Save Settings here. Time zone settings are saved. We have successfully configured this vSphere replication appliance. This is really all you need to do to get the vSphere replication appliance up and running. And honestly, I really didn't even have to go here. It really wasn't even required to change the site name. Now let's go and do the same thing on the other vSphere replication appliance. First, I want to verify that the vSphere replication appliance did indeed deploy successfully here in our secondary data center. There it is. We see the same console. We see the IP address for it here, which we configured when we deployed it. In this case, it's 10.0.1.210. 211 or 211. Let's go ahead and open that up in our web browser. And what mistake did we make here? Well, we forgot to add in the port number. If you recall, the port number here on the console of the virtual machine is :5480. So let's not forget to add that port number in. Let's try this one more time. There we go. Now we can log in. And just like the other vSphere replication appliance, there's not a lot to do here, but I do want to change the site name. I'm going to call this secondary and then give it the name of the physical location. In this case, the data center is in Dallas, Texas, and this is our secondary site. So nothing really else to configure here. I'll just click to save and restart the service. And we can see that our configuration was successfully saved up here. Let's now go over to our vSphere web client. And here we are at the primary site. Let's go to the home screen in the vSphere web client. And look at this. We've got a new option here. It says vSphere replication. So let's click on that. And notice that we have local sites and remote sites. Let's close this out. Give us a little bit more real estate here. So here's our primary site. We can click on that. And there's the IP address of the primary vSphere replication appliance. And this gives us status about outgoing replication, incoming replication, target sites. We can monitor the sites here, any potential issues, again, outgoing and incoming replications. And then if we go into manage, this is where we manage the target sites. If you go up to the action items up here, we've got a couple choices. We can connect to a remote site, or we can configure a site. Let's go ahead and connect to a remote site. And when we connect to a target site, we actually need to enter the name or IP address of the vCenter server. This is not the vSphere replication appliance at the secondary or target site. This is the vCenter server. So in this case, it's 10.0.1.131, and then root is the username, and then the password that I configured on that vCenter server virtual appliance. I'll click OK here. We'll accept the certificate. And there we go. We can see that we've connected to the secondary site, or actually we're in the process of connecting, I should say. But at least it found that the secondary site is called secondary-Dallas TX, just as we named it in the vSphere replication appliance over at the secondary site. So we know that it's learned something, at least. The status right now is disconnected. If we right-click on that to kind of give it a kick here in the pants and speed it up, I'll click Reconnect Site, because I can tell you otherwise it'll take a little bit of time. So now we're connected. We've got a target site. Let's go to the Summary tab here. We see our target site from the side of the primary data center. Now let's go over to the secondary data center and see if we can see the primary data center. So here I am at the Dallas, Texas secondary site. Again, let's go to Home. We have a new option here. We have vSphere replication. We also have it over here underneath the Home tab. There's vSphere replication. And then inside vSphere replication, I'll go into the sites. We see the secondary site there. I'll click on the secondary site. And we see information here about our secondary site. We see the name we configured. We see the IP address of the vSphere replication appliance. And down here we see the target site, which is primary, also known as Hilton Head, South Carolina. Currently, it's disconnected. Let's go into Manage the Sites. It's still disconnected. Let's give it a little kick here. I'll just right-click, and I'll click to reconnect the site. I'll say yes. It says that credentials are required to connect to the selected site. In this case, the credentials are the vCenter server credentials at the primary site. So in that case, it's administrator. Since that was a Windows installation, I'll click OK here. I'll accept the security certificate. and now we are successfully connected to the primary site. So if we go into monitor, currently we have no incoming or outgoing replications. That's because we haven't configured any virtual machines to be replicated yet. But thankfully we do have vSphere replication appliances working at both the primary site and the secondary site. Those vSphere replication appliances are connected to one another. They're communicating. Everything looks good. So now that we've successfully downloaded the vSphere replication appliance from VMware and then deployed it into both our primary and secondary data center, we've completed the task list for this lesson. So with that, let's go back to our slides. And that brings us to the conclusion of this lesson. In this lesson, we successfully downloaded vSphere replication from VMware. We deployed the vSphere replication virtual appliance into both our primary and secondary data centers, and then we configured those vSphere replication appliances to communicate with one another. Make sure that you watch the follow-up to this lesson, which walks you through the process of replicating a virtual machine from the primary site to the secondary site, and then recovering that virtual machine using vSphere replication. Thanks for watching this lesson covering introduction and installation of VMware vSphere replication.